A retired airline mechanic opens an envelope from a federal agency he's never heard of. 31 years on the job. He was promised $61,000 a year. The letter says something different. It doesn't just say his check is smaller. It says it's final. No adjustment, no appeal, no catching up, ever again. He wasn't defrauded. He wasn't scammed. Every number on that page was produced by a system working exactly as it was designed to. To understand how a man's retirement can shrink by tens of thousands of dollars a year, legally, you have to go back to 1963, to a car company most people under 60 have never heard of. Studebaker, once one of the biggest automakers in America. In December 1963, its plant in South Bend, Indiana shut down for good, and when it closed, it terminated its pension plan. A plan that had been underfunded for years, quietly, the way most pension shortfalls are. The result? About 3,600 already retired workers got their full pensions. Roughly 4,000 workers still on the job, some with decades of service, got about 15 cents on every dollar they were promised. And thousands of workers under 40 got nothing at all. Studebaker became the symbol that led directly to federal pension law, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA, passed in 1974. It was sold to the public as the fix. Companies would finally be required to properly fund what they promised. Workers would finally be protected. Here's what almost nobody explains. ERISA didn't eliminate the loophole that killed Studebaker's plan. It formalized it. ERISA required companies to fund their pensions using actuarial assumptions, projections of how much the plan's investments would earn over time. Sounds reasonable. Except companies got to choose those assumptions. And for decades, many chose numbers that were conveniently optimistic. 7%, 8% annual returns, projected indefinitely. Because the more a company assumed its pension fund would earn on its own, the less it was required to contribute out of pocket today. This wasn't fraud. It was legal, audited, signed off on by actuaries. It just meant that for 40 years, companies were allowed to underfund pensions in plain sight, one rosy projection at a time, and nobody outside a pension committee meeting ever noticed until the bill came due. And when it came due, companies had an exit, bankruptcy. Take United Airlines. In 2002, United filed for Chapter 11, and over the next 4 years, it terminated all 4 of its employee pension plans, one by one, transferring the obligation to the federal government's pension insurer, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, or PBGC. At the time, it was the largest pension default in U.S. history. 66,000 employees and retirees, pilots, mechanics, flight attendants, had their guaranteed retirement income replaced with a fraction of what they'd been promised. United didn't just survive bankruptcy, it emerged from it lighter. Freed from an estimated $3 billion a year in pension obligations, its stock price recovered. Executives who steered the company through bankruptcy were still there afterward, some with retention bonuses, paid by a company that had just told a federal judge it couldn't afford to pay its workers what it owed them. Delta did nearly the same thing a year later, in 2005, terminating its pilots' pension plan and becoming the second largest pension default in history at that point. Bethlehem Steel, once the second largest steel producer in America, did it in 2002, terminating a plan covering more than 95,000 people. Steel workers who'd spent their entire working lives on the line found out their retirement was now a federal insurance claim. Capped, reduced, permanent. Here's the playbook, laid bare. File, Chapter 11. Argue in bankruptcy court that the pension plan is a liability the company can't survive. Get a judge to approve termination. Transfer the obligation to the PBGC. Walk out of bankruptcy without your biggest legacy cost. Rebuild, recover. It's all completely legal. That's what makes it so unsettling. Bankruptcy law was never written to protect pensions. It was written to keep companies alive. And when survival and retirement security come into conflict, the law has consistently sided with survival of the company, not the worker. So where did all those transferred pensions actually go? Back to the mechanic from our hook. When the PBGC takes over a terminated plan, most people assume it means your pension is safe. That assumption is the entire problem. The PBGC doesn't pay what you were promised. It pays what it's legally allowed to pay, up to a hard ceiling. As of 2026, the maximum the PBGC will guarantee a retiree's starting benefits at age 65 in a single employer plan is $93,477 a year, about $7,790 a month. That's the ceiling, and it only applies at full retirement age in the standard payout form. Retire earlier, which many laid-off pension holders are forced to do, and that cap drops sharply, sometimes by more than half. For workers in multi-employer plans, common in trucking, construction, and other union trades, it's worse. The guarantee is calculated from a fixed rate per year of service that hasn't been adjusted for inflation, and by law, never will be. And here's the detail almost nobody explains. Even at the higher cap, the PBGC does not pay cost of living increases. If your original pension included COLA protection, that protection disappears the moment the PBGC takes over. Whatever number you're guaranteed the day the plan terminates is the number you live on, unadjusted, for the rest of your life. For someone who spent 3 decades planning around a fixed number, this isn't a rounding error. It's the difference between keeping a paid-off house and selling it, between filling every prescription and choosing which one to skip this month. The mechanic in our hook didn't lose his pension to a scandal. He lost the part of it that existed above a line drawn by federal formula, and no lawyer, no appeal, no letter to a senator gets that difference back. Private companies weren't the only ones playing this game, and bankruptcy wasn't the only tool. Public pensions, the kind covering teachers, firefighters, city and state workers, used a version of the same accounting sleight of hand, just without a bankruptcy court. State and local governments assumed their pension funds would earn 7 to 8% a year, indefinitely, which let them contribute less today while promising the same benefits tomorrow. Politicians who underfunded pensions to avoid raising taxes got the political win. They were usually long gone by the time the shortfall became undeniable. In Detroit, in Stockton, in cities and towns across Illinois, where the bill eventually landed on the next generation of taxpayers and retirees. And in the 1980s, corporate raiders found an even more direct extraction method, one that didn't require a company to be struggling at all. It only required a pension fund to have too much money. If a company's pension plan was overfunded, meaning its investments had grown beyond what was needed to cover promised benefits, a buyer could acquire the company, terminate the plan, pay out only what was legally owed, and pocket the surplus for itself. It was called a pension reversion. Between 1982 and 1990, more than $20 billion was extracted this way from over 2,000 retirement plans, covering 2.5 million workers and retirees. When Ronald Perelman took over Revlon in the mid-1980s, he gained control of $100 million in pension fund assets in the process. It got so common that Congress eventually stepped in, not to ban it outright, but to tax it into unprofitability. First with a 10% penalty in 1986, then raising it until reverted assets could be taxed at close to 85% by 1990. The practice slowed, but by then, the damage to trust in traditional pensions was already done, and companies had already started shifting towards something cheaper and far less risky for themselves, the 401k. Notice the pattern across every one of these stories. Underfunded pensions treated as an acceptable accounting choice, bankruptcy used as a legal exit ramp, a federal safety net that pays cents on the dollar. Public pensions run on the same optimistic math as private ones, and when a pension fund had money instead of a shortfall, that money got extracted too. Different decades, different companies, different loopholes, but the same result, again and again. The person who spent 30 years trusting the promise is the one left holding the shortfall. None of this required a criminal conspiracy. No executive needed to break a law to leave millions of workers with less than they were promised. That's not a bug in the story, it's the whole point of it. The system wasn't broken by people cheating the rules. It was built, one legal amendment and one court ruling at a time, so that this outcome was always allowed to happen. The mechanic who opened that PBGC letter did everything right. He worked the years. He trusted the plan. The shortfall wasn't his mistake. It was baked into the law decades before he ever collected his first paycheck. If this is the first time you're hearing how deep this goes, you're not alone. And it's exactly why we keep pulling these threads. Subscribe if you want the next one. What happened when companies stopped offering pensions altogether, and why the retirement plan that replaced them shifted every one of these risks directly onto you.